explains so much of the stock market and understanding why it can truly help you make money when investing. Follow along. The fundamental goal of investing is to get the most reward by taking on the least risk. A lot of people retirement only buy bonds, meaning that they're taking on virtually no risk in exchange for very little return. Meanwhile, degenerates on Wall Street bets blow their life savings on risk-free options on meme stocks, meaning that they have the potential to make 1,000% gains in a matter of days, but while taking on obscene risk if things go even slightly wrong. So, it seems like risk and reward are positively correlated. This makes a lot of sense. In a portfolio, the two main types of assets that people hold are stocks and bonds. Relative to each other, stocks are risky while bonds are safe. Looking at the history of the return of stocks and bonds, stocks return much more over the long term but at greater volatility.
With foreign markets volatile, now's a good time to invest in bonds.
So, if your portfolio is a mix of stocks and bonds, what allocation is the best for optimizing the balance between risk and reward? Enter a measure known as the Sharpe ratio, which can be thought of as risk-adjusted return. The whole optimization thing I've been talking about was the goal of modern portfolio theory, which was developed by American economist Harry Markowitz in 1952. Before I show you the results, I just want to take a second to like subscribe to the video. This is the argument for. Now onto the results. We'll dissect this graph extensively in just a moment, but something you'll notice right away is that the graph actually turns. Since bonds are less risky compared to stocks, you'll probably expect that a portfolio with 100% bonds would be the least risky. This isn't true. In fact, an allocation of 20-80 stocks bonds actually results in the least risk, despite still having more reward than 100% bonds. The fact that adding risky assets to a portfolio can actually decrease the overall risk is counterintuitive, but I'll tell you why that is soon. Trust me, understanding why is very important. After the point of minimum risk, the graph does go up as expected. This curve is known as the Markowitz bullet, and the portion after the point of minimum risk is the efficient frontier, which is defined as a set of portfolios that have the best possible expected level of return for its level of risk. Let's just pay attention to the efficient frontier for a second and see the Sharpe ratio. At the beginning, it's very low and increases steadily. However, it doesn't keep going up forever. In fact, the Sharpe ratio is maximized 55% stocks and 45% bonds. It then decreases after that point. Now, the efficient frontier is a portion of what's known in math as a hyperbola. It looks like this and is described by this equation. You might notice that it's kind of similar to the equation of a circle, and that's because they're both conic sections. The more you know. In this case, remember that y represents return and x represents risk. Now, I really wish I had a satisfying explanation as to why the relationship between risk and reward is somehow a hyperbola, but unless you want to get bogged down by 2-hour linear algebra lecture, I think it's best we just take it for granted. Every portfolio can be described in terms of risk and reward. If your portfolio falls under this curve, it is suboptimal, as you can get a better return while taking on the same amount of risk. Meanwhile, according to modern portfolio theory, portfolio above this curve should be impossible. Keep in mind that the efficient frontier will look slightly different based on what assets used to calculate it. For instance, if you bring in more assets, it'll actually go up. But we can do something pretty interesting now that we have an equation. In calculus, if you want to find the rate of change of a function, you do something called taking a derivative. You won't really need to understand derivatives for the purposes of this video, as you'll only need to know the outcome, which I will explain. Enjoy the montage. Notice how the first derivative, which is simply the rate of change, is always positive. This means that if you increase risk, reward will always increase, which is in line with our observations from earlier. However, if you look at the derivative of the derivative, or the second derivative of the efficient frontier, it is always negative, no matter where we are. This means that risk increases faster than returns increase. If I want to take on 1% more risk, I will always get less than 1% more return. I will get less relative return the more risk we take on. This means that the law of diminishing returns applies to the stock market. This reveals something pretty interesting. The risk/reward ratio is technically the best while taking on the least risk. The fact that there's actually an equation that dictates what return is possible actually teaches you what your expectations should be. No, that TikTok day trader does not have a foolproof strategy that he uses to double his money every week. That certainly does not fall under the curve. Furthermore, it demonstrates why diversification is so important. By using more assets, the efficient frontier ends up going up in the graph, meaning that you have more return for the same amount of risk. However, the efficient frontier should be taken with a grain of salt. As the name suggests, modern portfolio theory is merely a theory, and it does have flaws. However, it's still an excellent framework in regards to what we discussed today. Keeping this in mind, let's go back to when I was talking about the Sharpe ratios along the efficient frontier. There's a portfolio that capitalizes on that fact perfectly by leveraging the allocation. It defies the efficient frontier, giving you insane returns while having relatively low risk.